Greenfield, Wisconsin, 2003. A town that looked like it was straight out of a postcard. It was a place where everyone knew each other, where life was slow, and the biggest news was usually about the high school football team's latest win. With tree-lined streets, neat houses, and a community that felt like one big family, Greenfield was the picture of small-town America. Parents felt safe letting their kids play outside until the streetlights came on, and neighbors always greeted each other with smiles and waves. Sarah Mitchell was one of the town's shining stars. At 34, she seemed to have a successful career as an English teacher at Greenfield High School, a loving husband named Tom, and two beautiful children. To her students, she was more than just a teacher. She was a mentor and someone they could trust. Her classroom was always filled with laughter and learning, and many students said she helped them through tough times. Parents loved her for going the extra mile, always staying after school to help a student in need. Ethan Parker, 17, was one of those students. A senior at Greenfield High, Ethan was known for his easygoing nature and sharp mind. He was the kind of kid everyone liked, bright, polite, and always ready with a smile. Teachers saw him as a promising student with a bright future, while his friends knew him as someone they could always count on. Ethan's parents were proud of the young man he was becoming and didn't worry when he started spending more time at school, often staying late for what they believed were study sessions. The Mitchell family was well respected in Greenfield. Tom Mitchell was a local businessman known for his honesty, and Sarah was admired not just for her work at the high school, but also for her involvement in the community. They went to church every Sunday, hosted neighborhood barbecues in the summer, and were seen as the perfect family by many. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind closed doors, Sarah was hiding a dark obsession, one that would lead to unthinkable consequences. The quiet town of Greenfield was about to be rocked by a scandal that no one saw coming, and the lives of its residents would never be the same again. What drove Sarah Mitchell to cross the line? And how did a bright, promising student like Ethan Parker get caught in her web? The answers were about to be revealed, and they would leave the town of Greenfield forever changed. October 12, 2003 began like any other day in Greenfield, but for Ethan Parker, that night would be anything but ordinary. Ethan was last seen around 7 p.m., leaving his family home. He had told his parents he was heading to a friend's house to study something he often did, so there was no cause for concern. His mother, Carol Parker, remembers their last conversation clearly. "He seemed perfectly fine, just like any other night," she later recalled, her voice trembling with emotion. "He even joked about how I shouldn't wait up for him because they might study late." But when midnight came and there was still no sign of Ethan, worry began to creep in. By 2 a.m., panic had fully set in, and his parents were frantically calling his friends, hoping someone had seen or heard from him. Each call ended with the same unsettling response: "No, we haven't seen Ethan." Ethan wasn't the type to disappear without a word. He was reliable, responsible, the kind of son any parent would be proud of. His friends described him as someone who always kept his word, never missed a meeting or an appointment. So when the sun rose the next morning and there was still no sign of him, the Parkers knew something was terribly wrong. By the morning of October 13, the news of Ethan's disappearance had spread like wildfire through Greenfield. The close-knit community quickly rallied together, organizing search parties and plastering the town with flyers bearing Ethan's smiling face. His classmates, teachers, and neighbors all joined in, scouring every inch of the town and its surrounding areas, hoping to find any clue that might lead to his whereabouts. Local law enforcement immediately became involved, treating the case with the seriousness it demanded. Sheriff David Harper, a seasoned officer with over 20 years of experience, led the investigation. "This isn't like him," Harper told the local press, echoing the sentiments of everyone who knew Ethan. "We're treating this as a high-priority case. We're going to find him." But as the days turned into weeks, hope began to wane. Despite the tireless efforts of the community and law enforcement, there was no trace of Ethan, no signs of a struggle, no suspicious activity, nothing to suggest where he might have gone. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The town of Greenfield, once filled with the sounds of laughter and daily life, had fallen into a heavy silence, a cloud of uncertainty and fear hanging over its residents. The Parkers were left in agonizing limbo, caught between hope and despair as they waited for any news, any sign of their beloved son. Rumors and speculation began to swirl, as they often do in small towns. Whispers of possible foul play, of Ethan running away, even of some dark secret he might have been hiding. But no one could have guessed the horrifying truth that would soon come to light, a truth that would shake Greenfield to its core. December 3rd, 2003. Nearly 2 months after Ethan Parker's disappearance, Greenfield was still gripped by uncertainty and fear. The town's once lively atmosphere had been replaced by a somber stillness, as the search for Ethan had yielded nothing but heartbreak. But that all changed on a cold, overcast morning when two hikers, taking a trail through the dense woods just outside of town, stumbled upon something that would haunt them forever. At first, they thought it was a pile of discarded clothes, half buried under a thick layer of fallen leaves. But as they moved closer, the horrifying reality became clear there. In a shallow grave was the lifeless body of Ethan Parker. The scene was nothing short of gruesome, a stark contrast to the innocent young man everyone had been searching for. The hikers, paralyzed with shock, quickly called 911, their voices trembling as they described the grisly discovery. Within minutes, the area was swarming with law enforcement, crime scene investigators carefully combing through every inch of the site for clues. The news spread rapidly, sending waves of grief and horror throughout the community. For the Parkers, the discovery was their worst nightmare come true, a nightmare that no parent should ever have to face. Sheriff David Harper, who had been leading the investigation, was visibly shaken as he addressed the media. "This is a tragic day for Greenfield," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Ethan Parker was a beloved member of our community, and we are committed to finding out who is responsible for this heinous crime." As investigators pieced together the evidence from the crime scene, it became clear that Ethan's death was no accident. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head as the cause of death, and it was obvious that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal the body. But the biggest question remained: who could have done this, and why? The answer would come from a place no one expected: the digital world. As investigators dug into Ethan's life, they uncovered a series of emails and text messages that brought new revelations to light during the investigation. These communications revealed a secret relationship between Ethan and Sarah Mitchell, the very teacher who had been seen as a pillar of the community. The messages were explicit, detailing a twisted world of fantasy that Sarah had drawn Ethan into. What started as seemingly innocent attention had spiraled into something far more sinister, with Sarah using her position of authority to manipulate and control Ethan. The discovery of these messages was the breakthrough investigators needed, connecting the dots between Sarah's dark obsession and Ethan's tragic fate. Sarah, the once respected English teacher, had lured Ethan into a secret world, one that she carefully crafted, feeding off his vulnerability and her own dark desires. The emails and text messages between them revealed the extent of Sarah's manipulation. She played the role of mentor and confidant, slowly blurring the lines between right and wrong until Ethan was ensnared in a web of confusion and misplaced trust. One email, dated September 15, 2003, stood out in particular. Sarah wrote, "You're the only one who truly understands me, Ethan. What we have is special, something no one else could ever comprehend. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years." These words, seemingly harmless at first glance, were laced with an underlying current of control, drawing Ethan into her world. As the weeks passed, Sarah's messages grew more explicit, pushing the boundaries of their relationship. She spoke of fantasies that no teacher should ever share with a student, urging Ethan to meet her in secret, away from the prying eyes of the world. Ethan, caught between admiration for his teacher and the fear of what they were doing, found himself trapped. His friends noticed he was becoming more withdrawn, but when they asked if everything was okay, he would just smile and say he was fine. The reality was far more complex. Ethan was struggling with the weight of a relationship he knew was wrong, but felt powerless to escape. October 12, 2003 would be the last time anyone saw Ethan Parker alive. That evening, he agreed to meet Sarah in a secluded spot in the woods outside Greenfield, a place they had met before, far from the eyes of the community. But this meeting would be different. As Ethan arrived, he found Sarah waiting, her demeanor more intense than usual. The messages leading up to that night had been filled with an urgency that Ethan didn't fully understand. Sarah had spoken of taking their relationship to the next level, but Ethan had no idea what she truly meant by that. The details of what happened next remain chillingly unclear, but the evidence suggests that a confrontation quickly escalated. Perhaps Ethan, sensing the danger, tried to back out. Or maybe Sarah, driven by her own delusions, pushed too far. What is known is that the encounter turned violent. The autopsy revealed that Ethan had suffered a severe blow to the head, likely from a blunt object. Whether it was an accident or a deliberate act, only Sarah knows. But one thing was certain: Ethan never left those woods alive. In the aftermath, Sarah attempted to cover her tracks, burying Ethan's body and hoping that her secret would remain hidden. But secrets as dark as these have a way of coming to light, and Sarah's carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The discovery of Ethan's body and the digital trail left behind would expose the depths of Sarah Mitchell's obsession and the tragic consequences it had on a young life full of potential. Greenfield, a town that once prided itself on its safety and community spirit, was now forced to confront the horrifying reality that even in the most trusted places, darkness can take root and thrive. December 10th, 2003. Greenfield woke up to a day that would forever be etched in its collective memory. In the early morning hours, law enforcement officers quietly surrounded the home of Sarah Mitchell, the beloved English teacher who had been at the center of the community's heart. With a warrant in hand, officers knocked on the door. Sarah, still in her nightgown, answered, her face a mask of confusion and fear. Within minutes, she was handcuffed and led out of her home, her neighbors watching in disbelief from behind curtains and half-open doors. The once respected teacher, who had nurtured so many of Greenfield's children, was now being arrested for the murder of one of her students. The news spread like wildfire. By the time Sarah was taken to the police station, reporters were already gathered outside, their cameras flashing as she was escorted inside. The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented for Greenfield, a small town not accustomed to such high-profile drama. The story was too sensational to ignore: a trusted teacher involved in a scandalous affair that led to murder. As the details of Sarah's arrest became public, the town was thrown into chaos. The idea that someone like Sarah Mitchell could be capable of such a heinous crime was almost too much to bear. The media descended on Greenfield, turning what was once a quiet, idyllic town into the epicenter of a nationwide scandal. News vans lined the streets, reporters interviewed anyone willing to talk, and the story dominated headlines across the country. Parents who had once sung Sarah's praises now questioned everything they knew about her. "How could we have been so blind?" one mother asked, her voice shaking with anger. "We trusted her. We let our kids trust her. And she betrayed all of us in the worst possible way." The impact on Sarah's family was devastating. Her husband, Tom Mitchell, who had always been seen as a pillar of the community, found himself in the eye of the storm. Tom had no idea of the secret life his wife had been leading, and now he was left to pick up the pieces in the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Friends and neighbors who had once admired the Mitchells now kept their distance, unsure of how to reconcile the image of the perfect family with the grim reality that had been exposed. Tom's business suffered, with clients withdrawing their support, unable to separate him from the scandal surrounding his wife. The Mitchell children, too young to fully understand what was happening, were suddenly thrust into a world of confusion and fear, their lives turned upside down by the actions of the person they trusted most. March 15th, 2004, the trial of Sarah Mitchell began, and Greenfield found itself in the national spotlight once again. The small town's courthouse was packed with reporters, locals, and those curious to witness the unraveling of one of the most shocking cases in its history. The atmosphere was tense as the prosecution and defense prepared to present their cases in what promised to be a dramatic and emotionally charged trial. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Linda Garrett, wasted no time in laying out the damning evidence against Sarah. They called witnesses who had known Ethan Parker, including his close friends and teachers, who testified about his character and how he had changed in the months leading up to his death. Each testimony painted a picture of a bright young man who had been manipulated and ultimately destroyed by someone he trusted. Expert witnesses took the stand, detailing the digital evidence that had uncovered explicit emails and text messages exchanged between Sarah and Ethan. The prosecution argued that these messages were proof of Sarah's intent to control and exploit Ethan, leading to the tragic events of October 12, 2003. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to portray Sarah as a victim of her own mental instability. They argued that she had been suffering from severe emotional and psychological issues, which clouded her judgment and led her to make irrational decisions. Her attorney, David Collins, called on character witnesses who spoke of Sarah's dedication to her students and her exemplary record as a teacher. The defense tried to shift the focus away from the crime itself, instead emphasizing Sarah's supposed fragile state of mind. But the evidence against Sarah was overwhelming. The prosecution presented a compelling case that left little room for doubt, and the courtroom could feel the weight of the truth bearing down on them. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the defense's arguments were failing to sway the jury. The jury took only 6 hours to reach a unanimous decision. On April 2, 2004, Sarah Mitchell was found guilty of second-degree murder and sexual assault of a minor. As the verdict was read, there was a collective gasp in the courtroom, followed by the sound of quiet sobbing Ethan's parents, finally given the justice they had been desperately seeking. Judge Harris sentenced Sarah to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was severe, but it reflected the seriousness of her crimes and the need for accountability. As Sarah was led away in handcuffs, the once respected teacher, who had been a pillar of the community, was now a convicted murderer, her life in ruins. The impact of the verdict was felt throughout Greenfield. Ethan's family, though relieved by the outcome, were left to grapple with the loss of their son, a void that no amount of justice could ever fill. The town, too, was changed forever. The trial had exposed the darkness that can lurk behind even the most trusted faces, leaving Greenfield to pick up the pieces and try to move forward. The impact on the school was immediate. Trust, once a cornerstone of the student-teacher relationship, was shattered. Students who had once admired Sarah were left confused and betrayed, questioning how someone they looked up to could have committed such heinous acts. Teachers, too, were left reeling, their confidence in their profession shaken. How could they protect their students from dangers that lurked so close to home? In response to the scandal, Greenfield High implemented a series of stricter policies aimed at preventing anything like this from happening again. The administration introduced mandatory ethics training for all staff, increased supervision of student-teacher interactions, and established new protocols for reporting and addressing inappropriate behavior. The school also brought in counselors to help students and staff process the trauma of what had happened, but the scars were slow to heal. Once satisfied to drop their kids off at school without a second thought, parents were now questioning every encounter and every teacher. Greenfield's once defining sense of security had vanished, leaving behind a persistent anxiety that no modification to the policies could completely eradicate. A hard-won understanding of the risks that can exist even in the most trusted situations has replaced the town's collective innocence. The scandal had taken a devastating toll on her family. Tom Mitchell, who had stood by Sarah throughout the trial, finally filed for divorce, unable to reconcile the woman he had loved with the criminal she had become. He moved away from Greenfield, seeking a fresh start far from the place that had been the scene of his greatest heartbreak. The Mitchell children, now living with relatives, were forced to grow up with the stigma of their mother's crimes hanging over them, a burden they would carry for the rest of their lives. In the end, the story of Sarah Mitchell and Ethan Parker was more than just a scandal. It was a lesson in the dangers of unchecked power, the vulnerability of trust, and the tragic consequences that can arise when these forces collide. Greenfield would never be the same, but the lessons learned would ensure that the town, and others like it, would remain vigilant, aware that even in the most idyllic of settings, darkness can find a way in.